Chapter 17.
Sir, we've managed to get a strip cam filament into the collapsed chamber using the mechanism from a self-embedding charge. It's going to take weeks to remove enough material to search for organic remains. But one thing the cam has picked up is what looks like a chestplate of Mandalorian armor. I'll leave it up to you to decide if you want to pass that information on to General Zay.
Sitrep from RC-1138. Boss, to General Jussic.
Karima Route, Mandalore. 499 days after Geonosis.
You said you wanted a laboratory. Muriel was running out of patience, and he managed to show a remarkable amount to Kosei, given that he wanted to kill her. This is a laboratory. The Caminoan scientist couldn't quite bring herself to step into the structure. Attain tried to encourage her.
This is as good as you're going to get for the time being.
She said.
And it means you don't have to wait for a conventional lab to be built. This is Mandalore after all.
It's an agricultural trailer.
Kosei sounded crushed. Attain was used to all the subtle nuances in her tone now, and the Caminoan voice wasn't wholly sweetness and serenity any more than their character was. It was just harder for a human being to hear.
This is used for animals.
Don't tempt me to state the obvious, said Muriel. It's a mobile genetics unit, and I don't see what difference it makes whether it's racing Otupiendos or humans that you're assessing, except the Doopies are worth a lot more. Attain thought Muriel had done well to get hold of it, but Kosei had to poke her standards, reminding her that she could extract DNA with the pots, pans, and household chemicals in the kitchen wasn't going to help. She lowered her head and walked back into the house. Muriel shook his head. Attain, this is what they use at racetracks. Those guys are as tight on genome identification as any Kaminoan, right along with drug testing. This is just a mini version of what a half-decent university would have.
I know,
she said. He sounded like a husband who'd bought his wife a totally unsuitable gift and was hurt to find she didn't like it.
That's the downside of finding the one thing that motivates her and taking away everything else.
Okay, we could build a lab like she had on Daruma, but that's months away.
And we don't really intend for her to do any worthwhile Jedi genome research, do we?
No, but we certainly want her to design a delivery system for regulating my genes.
I think she's cracking up.
Muriel held up his hands, as if he didn't want to hear. Excuse me while I gag.
She's no use to us insane.
If you got any ideals for soothing her troubled soul, other than calling Camino or the Arcanians and negotiating a deal, or even doing the same with the Chancellor, then you're doing better than me. Attain was learning more than she ever wanted to about genetics. Many genes, Kosei liked to tell her, controlled aging. Attain didn't just see the enormity of the task facing Muriel. She also saw how many things might go wrong for her unborn child. In both, all she could do was take it a day at a time. She went after Kosei and tried to inject a little enthusiasm into her.
You managed with your lab on Daruma,
Attain said.
And that was pretty small too. You've got all the imaging and analysis stuff. Isn't that a start?
Kaminoan sat in the room she had made her sanctuary, a windowless storeroom where she could avoid direct sunlight, and shuffled her data pads into a neat pile. She didn't need locking up any longer. She'd shown no inclination to escape and never left the building unless Muriel made her. It was too bright and dry here for her liking.
That's the problem, Jedi.
She said.
It's a start, not a progression or a continuation. Beginning again is very hard sometimes.
Attain wondered how much difference it would make if she knew her own research still existed, and then imagined Muriel's reaction if she blew one of his main negotiating points. She almost dropped a hint. Almost.
There's always a commercial lab like Arcanian Micro.
They would never use my methodology. It's too slow for them. They're bulk producers. We all have our niche in the market.
Attain wondered what hatcheries that could churn out a few million clones counted as if not bulk then. But Kosei was right. 10 years was longer than most customers wanted to wait.
What would you want, ideally?
Attain asked.
Better imaging equipment, more computing power, and lab droids?
Attain took a datapad from her robes and slid it in front of the scientists. It was newly published research from an eminent embryologist on expression of some gene whose code number Attain couldn't even memorize. But it was the kind of material that was as exciting to Kosei as the latest celebrity gossip holozine would be to most Coruscanti Holovid fans. It distracted her. She glanced at the author's name.
He's mediocre at best.
She said sweetly.
I shall savor correcting this.
Of course you never published research, did you? Academics didn't even know Camino was there.
There were times when that was galling, I admit.
I'll talk to Muril. He's doing his best, believe me.
Perhaps he should have considered his best before he and that savage who corrupted him destroyed my life's work.
Kosei curled her long claw-like hand gently around Attain's arm.
You understand, though. You understand what it is to have so much knowledge, and yet have so few outlets for its application.
Attain had that sudden connection with another species, as they had sometimes when looking into Murd's eyes. When she felt she truly knew who was in there, did she understand? She could guess what motivated Kosei, imagine what it was to be her, and didn't even think as she thought up to a point. Perhaps she even pitied her, utterly alone and never able to go home, or even mix with her professional peers. Hang on, this is someone who builds children to design specs, and kills them if they don't meet quality control standards. It was an ugly thought for an expectant mother. Attain shook off the pity, and reminded herself that monsters weren't a separate species, or even wholly different from the rest of their own. And that was what made them monstrous.
I wouldn't swap lives with you, Chief Scientist.
She said.
I just don't understand why you won't concede a small thing to a handful of men who mean nothing to you anyway.
Scarada would sell that knowledge to the highest bidder. Mandalorians are immoral. Look at our clone donor Fett.
Kosei seemed to have no idea just how much of a crusade this was becoming for Scarada. He'd moved rapidly beyond the focus of just saving his boys. He was now repelled by the whole idea of cloning.
I don't think he would.
Attain said.
He's not a paragon of virtue, but I think he'd use it solely on his troops and then defray it. He'd never sell it.
She hoped that might soften Kosei. It happened to be the truth, and sometimes the truth was so unexpected in a dishonest world that it was a shock weapon. Attain left her to chew that over and went back to the mobile gene tech unit parked outside. Muriel was wiping down the surfaces with sterilizing fluid, like a fussy droid.
I don't think my Hearts and Minds initiative is working with her, Marika.
She said. That's because she's missing one of the essential components in that pair. I'll give you a few nanoseconds to work out which one.
I think she's finally coming to the end of her tether, after being away from Camino and all her comfort zones for a year. I don't think she's thought it through when she bolted.
Muriel stood back to admire his handiwork, visibly subdued. To Attain's lay eye, the lab looked pretty impressive, but then she had no idea what Topoka City laid on for its scientists. The whole planet relied wholly on cloning exports. Like I didn't think through what might happen if we got the research, grabbed the scientists, and then thought we had all the kit for making a solution to the problem. Muriel said at last. Even Knowles misjudge situations. That's why we're human, and not droids.
I think,
Attain said,
that you grabbed an opportunity because it was senseless to ignore it, and then started to put too much faith in it, as we all do sometimes.
And no woman who conceived a baby as she had could pass judgment on any clone for seizing what he could. Sometimes things worked out. The Force made her certain that something positive, she didn't yet know what, would come of all this. It had to. Jailer O'Brien's residence, Rampart Town, Coruscant, 499 days after Geonosis.
How's Fi today?
Bethany asked.
I brought Dar to see him.
Jailer O'Brien stood back to let them in. See for yourself. And if you can get Barden to relax for a while, You'll be doing better than me. He clapped Darwin on the shoulder. Good to see you again. How's course settling in? Fine, sir. He blew up a gas storage facility on Lille last week, and he was very pleased with himself. Sort of his qualifier for the squad, if he needed one. I'm glad to see you boys know how to have fun. Pi was propped almost upright now, but the tubes were still in place, and the Medroid, one that was programmed only to nurse, thankfully, checked the saline drip before leaving them with him. Jessic seemed back to his relaxed self. I waited for you, Jessic said. Time for the next stage. Darwin perched himself on the edge of Fi's bed and took his hand. Everyone did that automatically now. Jessic opened the holdall he'd brought on the first night and began pulling out a set of Mandalorian armor. I raided his locker, he said. You know how much this meant to him. The Jedi let out a gray leather comma, like a tablecloth where Fi could stare straight at it, and placed a red and gray helmet and armor plates on top of it. See that, Fi? Jessic sat on the other edge of the bed and tilted Fi's head a little, so if he was conscious of anything, at all, he could see the thing he prized most. A set of armor he'd pillaged on Quilura from a mercenary called Hoken. Bethany found it odd that they didn't seem to find killing a Mandalorian unsettling. You keep looking at that, Nervad, because you're going to be wearing it as soon as you're back on your feet. I promise you. You're a free man now. Jessic leaned over and looked into Fi's face, as if he expected him to answer, but the commando's eye movements seemed random and uncoordinated. Jessic settled at Fi's side again and put one hand on his scalp, pouring every effort into repairing the damaged tissue in his brain. Bethany thought it was time to leave Darwin with his brother for a while. O'Brim stood at the doorway a long time, and eventually surrendered to her tug on his sleeve. She could have sworn there were tears in his eyes. There were certainly tears in hers. They stood in the kitchen, and the captain busied himself making calf, missing the cup and scattering grains everywhere. He's never going to be back to normal, is he? O'Brim said, voice cracking. Even if he makes 90% of what he was, it'll still be hard on him.
The clones have a very high definition of normal, I have found. They're also incredibly resilient.
That boy in there. That boy saved my men from a grenade during a siege by throwing himself on it. I say that's worth more than a thank you and a few L's at the CSF staff club. He can stay here as long as he needs to, right? Bethany had heard that story so many times now from so many CSF officers, most of whom hadn't even been present during the incident, that she was beginning to understand how reputations and legends were made. O'Brien was one of life's hard men, and he didn't cry easily. But Fi has somehow become an icon, a symbol to the police, at least. Of all those in uniform who did the dirty jobs and got no thanks, he'd become a hero. In his ordo mentioned every time she used the phrase, Mandalorians had no word for hero.
Right.
Said Bethany.
And I'm glad Cal's got a friend he can turn to.
Someone his own age to play with, eh? O'Brien rattled cups and said nothing, with the same expression on his face that she'd seen on Scarata's. It was the face of a man working out who he needed to hurt to make things right with the galaxy. Is this what we elected?
What?
We both work for government enforcement, or Coruscant citizens. Is this what we thought we were getting as part of the deal? What's happening to the Republic?
I know I've asked myself the same thing.
I did 28 years in the Senate Guard before I transferred to CSF. Did I take my eye off the ball? I wonder if it happened on my watch, and I didn't spot it.
Police can only deal with the law, not ethics.
But these decisions are being made by politicians I've known and protected for years. It makes it personal betrayal, I suppose. O'Brim seemed to focus on the calf again. Technically, in law we just stole government property. Like taking old office equipment from a department dumpster, not a living, breathing man with rights. How did we ever let that happen?
It didn't happen overnight. It crept up on us.
But who's going to do anything about it? The Senate's smiling and nodding, and even the Jedi Council. Okay, I talk to Jessic too much.
He's going to rebel, isn't he?
He's not happy wearing the robes. I can tell you that. Very moral boy. Very moral. None of this seeing stuff from a certain point of view. No ambiguity. He calls it as he sees it. Bethany wondered if Scarada knew, and then thought he probably spotted Jessic's tendencies right from the start. He was good at that.
Can they leave? Can Jedi resign?
No idea. Maybe they get them to turn in their belt and lightsaber or something.
We'll find out. Ordo says there will be a showdown with his boss before too long.
Bethany left Darman, as long as she could, keeping an eye on the chrono because she was now fitting this into her lunch breaks. Jessic was still sitting there with his hand on Fi's head, doing whatever it was that the Jedi did when they healed others, and talking very quietly to him. He glanced up at her, distracted for a moment, as she took Fi's free hand. She found herself with a nervous grip on the tips of his fingers, sensing no reaction, and feeling she was somehow intruding by touching him when he wasn't aware of it, or at least unable to respond to her. With his features slack, eyes half closed and blinking frequently, he looked more of a total stranger now than when he'd been completely unresponsive.
I'll be back later, Fi.
She said.
One of the other Knolls is coming to see you soon. Adden.
Jessic patted her on the hand, not looking up. She had the air taxi drop Darman at the barracks, and then got off a few blocks from her office to take a few minutes to think, widening again now, taking in the city around her, and the beings streaming past her on foot, and in speeders, and she had a moment of frightening clarity. I pulled a blaster on staff at the med center and abducted a patient. Or stole government property. Whatever. I did it, and that's on top of slicing data. They'll fire me, if whoever was watching me doesn't shoot me first. She was too deeply mired in the situation to lose her nerve now, and damned either way. If she was going to be disgraced, which she was, then it wouldn't make matters any worse if she pulled out all the stops. I used to be sensible. Bethany sat at her desk and logged into the accounting override system, the rarefied atmosphere where auditors could observe transactions at will. She'd been honest all her life, scrupulously so. It was her job to root out dishonesty among others, but it was time the Republic paid its dues. And it could start with Fi, RC 8015, who didn't exist now and had never existed in law. She had the access codes and the ability to cover the audit trail that led to her. It was a relatively straightforward matter to slice into the Grand Army's database and record that RC-8015 had been terminated after receiving injuries from which he was unlikely to recover. Among a few thousand commandos, hidden among a few million men, nobody above his own commander, General Zay, would even bother to check. His place in Omega Squad was already filled, and clones died every day. She hit the execute key, and Fi was a free man for the first time in his short and tragic life.
Office of the Director of Special Forces, SO Brigade, HQ, Coruscant, 503 days after Geonosis.
Scarada never liked to be summoned to anyone's office, but he seemed keen to respond to General Zay today. Ordo accompanied him. He hadn't been summoned, but if Zay wanted to kick him out, he could try. The Jedi looked like a man under increasing pressure. "I've cut you a lot of slack, Sergeant," Zay said. "A galaxy of slack. A budget of slack. Now, where is he? And what's Jessic playing at?" Calbur was the last man to be intimidated by anyone, and Zay couldn't even come close to it. Ordo caught Maze's eye, and found they were both tense to step in and back up their master, like a pair of strills. Yes, that's exactly what we are. Animals trained to kill, and we can never be trusted not to turn wild again. Maze and Ordo had an understanding, though. Maybe Maze understood a whole lot better, since he'd been educated about his arch brother's soul. "Fi's dead, sir." Scarada said it, It says so on the database.
That is, to use your phrase, a load of Osic.
Really?
Scrata's arms were at his sides, which was never a good sign.
Well, he was in a coma, and medical care was withdrawn, seeing as the Republic is too nice and civilized to leave a creature that can't feed itself to starve to death. The Bedroids were ready to, what's the euphemism? Euthanize him? So one way or the other, he's dead, and that the Republic washes hands of him now, that he's no longer useful.
And RC-8015.
No longer exists, sir.
Zay looked mortified. He wasn't a callous man. He didn't even trot out all the usual Jedi platitudes, but Ordo still thought less of him for not being like Bart and Jessic.
Sergeant, I've seen the record. I don't know how you did it, but I know you did, and I want to account for his whereabouts.
Need to know, General. And you don't.
This is not your private army, Scarada.
Except when it suits you.
Sergeant, you're still a serving member of the Grand Army of the Republic, and we have a chain of command here.
Is that a threat?
I could remove you from your post.
You could try. But even if you kick me out, I'll still be around. And my influence and networks, and abilities to perform, will remain unchanged in all but name. You need me inside the tent, not outside throwing rocks.
Zay probably understood that he created the out-of-control Scarada standing in front of him, and that there was no putting the man back in his box. Ordo was, as always, proud of his father and inspired by his refusal to be cowed. Zay's only option was to kill Scarada, just like an R-trooper who no longer towed the line, and Ordo didn't give much for Zay's chances of that, so the fight was on.
Well, just to keep your records tidy, here's his armor tally.
Scarada collected the ID tallies from the fallen clone troopers whenever he could, an echo of the Mandalorian habit of keeping a piece of armor as a memorial. Mandoad often didn't have the time, place, or opportunity for graves.
Is there anywhere in particular you'd like me to shove it?
Zay paused, almost grinding his teeth behind that graying beard, then held out his hand for Scarada to drop the small plastoid tab into his palm. Their eyes locked for a moment, and Ordo willed Zay to look away first. He did. Honor was satisfied. Cal Burr, shorter, outranked, no force powers, was still the alpha male.
Look, I'm sorry about Phi.
Zay said quietly.
I'm sorry about every single clone who loses his life or gets wounded. As Jedi, we endeavor to treat all sentient life with compassion. Don't think we don't agonize about it. I was discussing it with General Kenobi.
That's the way you talk about animals, sir. Not men. If you meant that patronizing twaddle, you'd insist troopers were offered a choice of remaining as volunteers or leaving.
Scarada paused, but judging by the way he swallowed, it wasn't for effect.
And I don't mean with the help of one of your covert ops death squads either.
Zay stared back at Scarada, as if this was news to him. It might well have been. The Jedi generals seemed to be out of the loop as far as the conduct of the war was concerned, in terms of both what the Chancellor told them and how much notice he took of their advice.
Is there something you want to tell me, Sergeant?
Either you know, or you need to know, that ARC troopers who get out of line end up executed, and I have proof that at least one was targeted by our own covert ops troops.
Zay didn't look too happy. It wasn't the look of a guilty man caught out, though. It was an angry man whose face was illuminated by drawing realization.
I know nothing of this.
Then it's about time, Scarada said, that you Jedi took your heads out of your shebs, stopped contemplating your midichlorians, and did a reality check. You're going to get a nasty shock one day, General. We told you about the vastly inflated claims of enemy droid numbers, and tactics didn't change. We told you we should be concentrating forces on a few main theaters, cleaning up before moving on, and not scattering forces so we never quite have the strength to root out the enemy. Again, nothing changed. None of this is winning the war. It's just keeping it going. So I wonder how much it's worth risking our necks to find out for you if that intel isn't used.
Zay snapped. He slapped both hands on his desk, an ordinary man at the limit of his endurance now, not a Jedi. Ordo didn't flinch, but he saw the discomfort on Maze's face.
Skirata, the Jedi Command doesn't run this war. Zay roared. The politicians do, and the Chancellor says this is how we fight. End of story.
Doesn't that scare the OSIC out of you?
Of course it does. What do you think we are, idiots? But I've learned that that's how wars always work. Politicians don't listen to the military. Everyone lies, widely about their assets, and there are never enough troops to go around. Maybe Mandalorians live in a different reality.
You've got plenty of assets, actually.
Ordo had a second of adrenaline, / panic. That Skirata would mention the syntax clones, but he didn't expand, and Zay was now too angry to stop himself from interrupting him. I fully committed the whole brigade, Skirata, although I have to ask what your arcs are actually tasked to do sometimes.
You wanted Black Ops folks like me to do the dirty work. This is the price of dirty work, sir.
Skirata didn't wait to be dismissed, and stalked out almost without limping. Ordo followed. They strode down the corridor, boots echoing, until they reached the parade ground exit. It was a pleasantly balmy day outside, and they sat on the low perimeter wall to have a hot wash-up. It was a lovely phrase for working out what the Shav had gone wrong. One of those military euphemisms that poor Phi enjoyed so much.
Zay didn't know about the death squads,
Ordo said.
He really didn't. He's the head of special forces.
Skirata fumbled in the pockets of his leather jacket and pulled out a Rurik root and some candied fruit. The Rurik for him and the candies for Ordo. He chewed savagely, gaze and slide to focus.
He ought to make it his business to know. And I think it was wise not to mention the new clone programs. Zay really would go charging into demand. That Windu got answers on that one. I prefer the Chancellor's office not notice us. Bethany did a fine job there, but I don't want to get her killed.
Skirata nudged Ordo in the place with his elbow.
She's good all around, that one. But put her out of her misery. Give her the sapphires, and ask her how she likes the idea of living in the middle of nowhere with a depressed Kaminoan for a house guest, okay? I'll tell her they're stolen. She's touchy about that kind of thing, being treasury. Or Dika. Just take a couple of days out and spend quality time with her. You know what I'm saying? Yes, Calber.
Skirata spat the fibrous remains of the Rurik into the flower bed next to the wall.
In a year's time, if we still got a year, then I want everything in place for an instant Baslan Shevla.
It meant strategic disappearance, a Mando tactic for scattering and disappearing from sight, only to coalesce into an army again later. For them it meant banging out to the Bastion on Mandalore and helping any like-minded clones that they could. They never did get around to talking about Jessic. Zay would realize that and come back for round 2 with Skirata sooner or later. But unlike Skirata, he didn't have the luxury of Baslan Shevla. Maybe he needed to think about that. Everyone needed a plan B.
Even Jedi.